The sodium lights of Carter's mechanical workshop cast long shadows across the empty lot as James Carter wiped grease from his hands, ready to call it a night. At 32, he'd built a reputation as the best mechanic in New Providence, though tonight that reputation felt more like a curse than a blessing. The clock read 11:47 p.m., and he'd just finished with his last emergency repair of the day. The first sign that this wasn't going to be an ordinary night came as a high-pitched whine from somewhere above the shop. James stepped outside, squinting at the star-filled sky. The sound grew louder, accompanied by an odd purple glow that definitely wasn't the aurora borealis. "What in the world?" he muttered, reaching for his phone. Before he could start recording, the purple light intensified, and something massive broke through the cloud cover. It was sleek, silver, and absolutely not from Earth. The craft was losing altitude fast, trailing what looked like plasma from its port side. James's first instinct was to run. His second, stronger instinct was to help. He'd never turned away anyone in need of repairs, and he wasn't about to start now, even if they came from another planet. The ship managed a surprisingly gentle landing in the empty field behind his workshop, though its descent left a long groove in the earth. As the dust settled, James approached cautiously, toolkit in hand. The vessel was about the size of a small yacht, its hull composed of a material that seemed to shift colors in the moonlight. A panel on the side hissed open, releasing a cloud of sweet-smelling vapor. James held his ground, heart pounding as a figure emerged from the mist. She was tall, with skin that had a subtle silvery sheen and hair that seemed to capture and reflect starlight. Her features were almost human, save for the subtle luminescence of her eyes and the delicate markings that traced along her temples. "You're the mechanic?" she asked in perfect English, though her voice carried an otherworldly resonance. James nodded, trying to maintain his professional composure. "James Carter. And you are?" "Ambassador Naira of the Celestial Concordat," she replied, glancing nervously at the sky. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I'm in need of urgent repairs. My ship's quantum drive was damaged in an incident." "An incident that has something to do with why you keep checking the sky?" James asked, already examining the damaged section of the hull. Naira's expression tightened. "There are those who would prefer I not reach tomorrow's peace conference. The future of several worlds depends on these negotiations succeeding." James whistled low as he got a better look at the damage. The hull breach wasn't large, but the technology was like nothing he'd ever seen. Still, underneath all the alien tech, he could recognize the basic principles of propulsion and power distribution. "I can help," he said finally, "but I'll need you to explain how some of these systems work." "I'm a quick study." A series of rapid beeps emerged from inside the ship, and Naira's posture stiffened. "We don't have much time. They're following my ion trail." "They?" "The Shadowborn Collective. They've spent decades profiting from the conflicts between worlds. This peace treaty would end their power base." She moved closer, her luminescent eyes meeting his. "I'm sorry to involve you in this, but I had no choice. If I don't reach that conference by tomorrow evening, war will break out across 3 star systems." James took a deep breath, weighing his options. His logical mind told him to walk away, this wasn't his fight. But he'd never been good at turning his back on someone in need, even if that someone happened to be an alien diplomat on the run from an interstellar crime syndicate. "Well," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "I guess we better get to work then." The next hour was a crash course in alien engineering. Naira proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining the basics of their quantum technology while James adapted his Earth-based knowledge to the task at hand. The damage was significant but not irreparable, the main problem was the time constraint. They were deep in repairs when Naira's ship emitted another warning tone. This one was deeper, more urgent. She rushed to the cockpit, checking the sensors. "They're here," she announced, her voice tight with tension. 3 pursuit vessels just entered Earth's atmosphere. James looked up from the panel he was repairing, his hands steady despite the surge of adrenaline. How long do we have? Minutes at most. The repairs aren't complete, we'll never outrun them like this. A plan began forming in James's mind. It was risky, probably crazy, but it might just work. We don't need to outrun them, he said, grabbing his tablet and connecting it to the ship's systems. We just need to outsmart them. What are you thinking? Naira asked, watching as his fingers flew across the screen. Your quantum drive operates on principles similar to our particle accelerators, just more advanced. If I can reverse the polarity of the damaged section, it would create a localized quantum distortion field, Naira finished, her eyes widening. But that's incredibly dangerous. One miscalculation and we could tear a hole in spacetime. James grinned, already making the necessary adjustments. Good thing I've always been good at math then. The first pursuit ship appeared on the horizon, its dark hull barely visible against the night sky. James worked faster, sweat beading on his forehead as he rerouted power systems and modified control protocols. Years of fixing everything from classic cars to experimental aircraft had taught him how to improvise, how to see solutions where others saw only problems. There's something you should know, Naira said suddenly, her voice softer. The peace conference, it's more than just diplomacy. I'm carrying data that proves the Shadowborn Collective has been manipulating both sides, staging attacks, creating artificial conflicts. If this information doesn't reach the conference, it will, James assured her, making the final connections. Ready? The pursuit ships were closing in, their weapons charging. Naira nodded, taking her position at the controls. James activated his modified system, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to ripple, like heat waves off hot asphalt, but 1,000 times more intense. The pursuing ships flew right into the distortion field. Their engines sputtered and died as the quantum interference disrupted their systems. They began falling from the sky, their emergency landing systems barely managing to prevent catastrophic crashes. It worked! Naira exclaimed, but James was already back to repairing the drive. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to finish these repairs before they recover. And something tells me they're not going to be happy when they do. As they worked through the night, James couldn't help but wonder how his life had changed so dramatically in just a few hours. But as he glanced at Naira, saw the determination in her luminescent eyes and the hope she carried for her people, he knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as impossible challenges, and James Carter had never been one to back down from a challenge. The night was far from over, and their adventure was just beginning. Dawn was approaching when James finished the final repairs to Naira's quantum drive. The disabled pursuit ships lay silent in the distance, their dark hulls reflecting the first hints of morning light. But both James and Naira knew their reprieve wouldn't last long. The drive should hold, James said, closing the access panel. But I've never worked with technology this advanced before. I can't guarantee how it'll perform under stress. Naira ran her hand along the repaired section, her silvery skin seeming to resonate with the ship's energy. Your work is remarkable, especially for someone who's never encountered our technology. There's more to you than meets the eye, James Carter. Before he could respond, a holographic display materialized in the cockpit, showing multiple aircraft approaching from different directions. These weren't the sleek pursuit ships from before, they were Earth military aircraft. Your government has noticed our visitors, Naira said grimly. We need to leave. Now. James hesitated. Leaving Earth hadn't been part of his plan, but staying meant facing difficult questions from authorities who wouldn't understand the situation. How long would we be gone? The peace conference is being held on Europa Station, in orbit around Jupiter. With a functioning quantum drive, we can make it in hours rather than months. She paused, her luminescent eyes meeting his. I won't force you to come, but I could use your help. If the drive malfunctions. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance made the decision for him. Let me grab my toolkit. Minutes later, they were breaking through Earth's atmosphere. James had worked on experimental aircraft before, but nothing prepared him for the sensation of quantum travel. The stars stretched and blurred around them as the ship accelerated, reality itself seeming to bend. I should warn you, Naira said once they were safely away from Earth, the Shadowborn Collective isn't our only problem. There are factions within the Celestial Concordat itself who oppose the peace treaty. Political opponents? Warmongers. Those who've built their power on conflict. She activated another holographic display, showing what looked like a massive space station. Europa Station is neutral territory, but getting there won't be easy. The collective has agents everywhere, and they're not the only ones who want me dead. James absorbed this information while examining the ship's systems. The quantum drive was holding stable, but something about the power distribution seemed off. You still haven't told me exactly what's on that data you're carrying. Naira was quiet for a long moment. Evidence of orchestrated attacks, false flag operations. The collective hasn't just been profiting from war, they've been manufacturing it. They've infiltrated governments, military commands, even peace organizations. And you have proof? Enough to bring down their entire operation. But it's not just documents and recordings. She hesitated. There's also technical data about weapons they've been developing. Planet killers. Technology that could render entire worlds uninhabitable. The gravity of the situation hit James hard. This wasn't just about preventing a war, it was about stopping those who would profit from genocide. How did you get this information? I had help from the inside. Someone in the collective couldn't stomach what they were planning. Her expression darkened. They died getting this data to me. A warning alarm interrupted them. The quantum drive's power fluctuated, causing the ship to shudder. James immediately went to work, his hands moving quickly over the controls. The power distribution is destabilizing, he explained, rerouting systems. The repair is holding, but something's draining extra energy. Naira's hands flew across the holographic interface, her face showing growing concern. That's impossible unless... She accessed a different system, and her expression hardened. We've been compromised. There's a quantum tracker embedded in the ship's core. Can we remove it? Not without shutting down the drive completely. And if we do that out here, we'd be sitting ducks, James finished. He studied the power readings, an idea forming. But maybe we don't need to remove it. Every tracker needs to transmit data. If we could modify the quantum field harmonics, we could feed it false coordinates, Naira caught on. But that would mean manually adjusting the field every few minutes. One mistake and the drive could collapse. James gave her a determined smile. Then I'd better not make any mistakes. The next few hours were intense. While Naira piloted them through the solar system, James worked to maintain their deception. It was delicate work, requiring constant adjustments to keep the tracker fed with false data while ensuring the quantum drive remained stable. They were approaching the asteroid belt when multiple ships emerged from behind Mars' larger moon, Phobos. Their design was different from the pursuit ships on Earth, more elegant, but no less deadly. Concordat military vessels, Naira said, her voice tight. The warmonger faction must have figured out I survived Earth. Friends of yours? Hardly. They're loyal to Admiral Reckon. He's been pushing for full-scale war for years. She engaged evasive maneuvers as the ships began to close in. The collective may want to stop the peace conference, but Reckon wants to use it as a target. Destroy all the diplomatic leaders at once and blame it on terrorists. James checked their systems. The quantum drive was operating at peak efficiency, but the constant field adjustments needed to fool the tracker meant they couldn't use it to escape. They would have to outmaneuver their pursuers using conventional propulsion. "How good are you at flying through asteroids?" he asked, noting their position. Naira's expression shifted to one of grim determination. "Good enough. But they'll follow us in. That's what I'm counting on." James began modifying the ship's defensive shields. "Their ships are bigger, less maneuverable. And I doubt they have a mechanic on board who knows how to adapt their shields for meteoroid impacts." A slight smile crossed Naira's face as she understood his plan. "You really are full of surprises, James Carter." She guided their ship into the asteroid belt as energy beams from the pursuing vessels lit up the void around them. James worked to strengthen their shields while maintaining the quantum field deception. It was like trying to solve two complex equations simultaneously while riding a roller coaster. The battle that followed was unlike anything in James's experience. Naira's piloting skills were incredible as she wove between massive rocks, using them as cover while their pursuers struggled to keep up. Several smaller asteroids shattered against their modified shields, but the reinforcements held. The same couldn't be said for their attackers. One by one, the larger ships suffered damage from impacts their shields weren't prepared for. Soon, only two remained, and they were falling behind. "We're clear," Naira announced as they emerged from the asteroid field. "But we've burnt through a lot of fuel with that maneuver." James checked their resources. "We have enough to reach Europa Station, but our margin for error is gone. One more battle like that. Then let's hope we don't run into any more old friends." Naira set course for Jupiter, but her troubled expression suggested she didn't believe they'd be that lucky. As they continued their journey, James couldn't help but marvel at how far he'd come from his quiet workshop on Earth. In less than a day, he'd repaired an alien ship, escaped Earth, and helped outmaneuver military vessels in an asteroid belt. But as he watched Naira skillfully pilot them toward Jupiter, he knew the real challenges still lay ahead. The peace conference wasn't just about preventing a war anymore. It was about exposing those who would profit from suffering, about standing against the darkness that lurked in the shadows between stars. And somehow, a mechanic from Earth had become crucial to its success. Europa Station grew larger in their viewport, a massive structure of gleaming metal and crystalline domes floating against Jupiter's swirling storms. As they approached, James noticed something odd about the station's defense grid. "The perimeter beacons are dark," he said, pointing to the navigation display. "Shouldn't there be more security for a peace conference?" Naira's hands tightened on the controls. "There should be. Something's wrong." She accessed the communication channels, but only static greeted them. "All frequencies are being jammed." A flash of movement caught James's eye, ships emerging from behind the station. Their design was familiar, Shadowborn collective vessels, but these were larger, heavily armed. "They're already here," Naira whispered, her luminescent eyes widening. "They must have infiltrated the station's security protocols. Can we warn the diplomats? If the collective has control of communications." She stopped suddenly, staring at a new reading on their displays. No, this is worse than I thought. Those energy signatures, they're arming the station's defense systems." James studied the readouts, his experience with power systems letting him see the implications. "They're not just trying to stop the conference. They're going to use the station's own weapons to destroy it. With all the diplomatic leaders aboard. It would trigger an immediate war." Naira's voice was tight with controlled fury. Every major power would blame the others. The collective would profit from decades of conflict. Before they could decide on a course of action, their ship's quantum drive suddenly powered down. Emergency lights flashed as multiple systems went dark. "We've been hit with some kind of shutdown pulse," James said, already moving to access the engine controls. But when he reached the panel, he found it locked with an encryption he'd never seen before. "This isn't the collective's doing," Naira said quietly. She touched a hidden control, and a compartment opened in the wall, revealing a sleek weapon. This is internal sabotage. Someone who knew exactly how to disable our systems. James felt a chill run down his spine. Someone like a Concordat diplomat? The warmonger faction must have agents on my own staff. She armed the weapon with practiced ease. We need to get to the auxiliary control room. From there, we might be able to override the main systems. A loud clang echoed through the ship as docking clamps engaged. They were being pulled into one of the station's smaller hangars. I hope you're as good at fighting as you are at repairs, Naira said, tossing him a smaller weapon. Because we're about to have company. James examined the device, finding it similar enough to Earth weapons to be usable. I did some security work in my younger days. But I'm better at improvising. The ship's airlock cycled, and they took positions on either side. When it opened, they were ready for the armed figures that rushed in. What they weren't ready for was the identity of their leader. Ambassador Torin, Naira said, recognition and betrayal mixing in her voice. I trusted you. The tall, distinguished alien's face showed no emotion. Like Naira, he had the silvery skin of the Concordat, but his eyes held none of her warmth. You trusted too easily, Naira. Peace was never the goal. War is profitable, for those who know how to harvest its rewards. You're working with the collective? James asked, keeping his weapon trained on the guards. Torin smiled coldly. The collective, the warmongers, the arms dealers, we're all part of the same machine. War is our currency, and peace is bad for business. The evidence I gathered, Naira said. You were the one who helped the collective plant false flags, stage attacks. Among other things. Your idealism made you the perfect courier. No one would suspect you of carrying the very weapons designs you hope to expose. Torin gestured, and his guards raised their weapons. Now, hand over the data core. Instead of complying, Naira glanced at James and winked. In that split second, he understood. While they were talking, she'd been slowly moving her hand toward the ship's environmental controls. You want the data? She asked. Come and get it. She slammed her hand down on the controls. Instantly, the artificial gravity reversed. The guards, unprepared, flew toward the ceiling. James and Naira, who had braced themselves, used the moment of chaos to act. James fired at the overhead lights, plunging the ship into darkness. In the confusion, they escaped through a maintenance hatch Naira had noticed earlier. Behind them, they could hear Torin shouting orders. The maintenance tunnels run throughout the station, Naira explained as they crawled through the narrow space. We can use them to reach the auxiliary control room. Won't they expect that? Yes, but they don't know these tunnels like I do. I helped design this station's security systems, before they were compromised. They emerged in a lower level of the station, alarms blaring around them. Through nearby windows, they could see more collective ships arriving, taking up attack positions. How long until they start firing? James asked. They'll wait until all the diplomatic ships have docked. Maximum casualties, maximum impact. Naira checked a station terminal. We have maybe 30 minutes. Then we better hurry. James examined another terminal, his mind racing. These systems are similar to Earth's satellite controls. If I can access the main computer, you might be able to override their control of the defense grid. Naira nodded appreciatively. But we'll need to reach the core first. They moved carefully through the station's corridors, avoiding patrols and using Naira's knowledge of the layout to stay hidden. But as they got closer to their goal, James noticed something strange about the power fluctuations in the station. These readings don't make sense, he said, studying a maintenance panel. The power usage is too high for normal operations, even with weapons charged. Naira reviewed the data, her expression growing grim. They're not just planning to destroy the diplomatic ships. They're going to overload the station's reactor. The explosion would take out everything within 1,000 kilometers. Including any evidence of their involvement, James finished. How do we stop it? We'll need to split up, she said after a moment's thought. One of us has to reach the auxiliary control room to stop the reactor overload. The other needs to get to the main communication array and warn the diplomatic ships. James didn't like the idea of separating, but he could see the logic. I can handle the reactor. I've worked with similar systems before, just on a smaller scale. James. Naira hesitated, then quickly pressed something into his hand. It was a small data crystal, glowing with stored information. The real evidence, not what Torin thinks I'm carrying. If anything happens. He closed his hand around the crystal, meeting her gaze. Nothing's going to happen. We didn't come this far to fail now. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their mission hanging between them. Then Naira did something unexpected. She leaned forward and kissed him softly. Her lips held a slight electric charge that made his skin tingle. For luck, she said with a small smile. Try not to blow up the station while I'm gone. As they parted ways, James couldn't help but wonder if he'd see her again. But there was no time for doubt. They had a station to save, a war to prevent, and a conspiracy to expose. And somewhere in the chaos, a simple mechanic from Earth had found something worth fighting for beyond the stars. James raced through the maintenance tunnels of Europa Station, the data crystal secure in his pocket and Naira's kiss still tingling on his lips. The station's emergency lights cast alternating patterns of shadow and red illumination, matching the urgent rhythm of his heartbeat. The reactor control room wasn't far, but the real challenge would be getting inside. He could hear patrols in the main corridors, their boots echoing on metal floors. Using his tablet, he accessed a nearby terminal, checking the station's power distribution. That's not good, he muttered. The reactor's containment field was already showing signs of stress. Torin and his conspirators had started the overload sequence earlier than expected. They had maybe 15 minutes, not 30. A burst of weapons fire in the distance made him freeze. He hoped Naira was okay, but he couldn't afford to worry about her now. The lives of everyone on the station depended on him reaching that reactor. The maintenance tunnel ended at a junction, forcing him into the main corridor. As he peered around the corner, he saw 2 guards stationed outside the reactor control room. They wore Shadowborn collective armor, but their stance suggested military training. More evidence of how deep the conspiracy went. James checked his weapon, then looked around for alternatives. A direct confrontation would only alert more guards. That's when he noticed the environmental control panel nearby. Years of repair work had taught him that every system had vulnerabilities, you just had to know where to look. Working quickly, he accessed the panel and began rerouting power connections. If he could create a cascading failure in the air recycling system. The corridor's ventilation fans suddenly reversed with a loud whine. Emergency protocols kicked in, sealing off sections of the hallway with containment doors. The guards, caught by surprise, found themselves trapped in a rapidly depressurizing section. They reached for their emergency breathers, but James was already moving. He sprinted to the control room door and used the precious seconds of confusion to override the lock. Inside, he found exactly what he feared: the reactor controls were already compromised. Okay, he whispered to himself, think like a mechanic. The reactor's quantum core was similar to Naira's ship's drive, just on a massive scale. The conspirators had bypassed the safety protocols, initiating a chain reaction that would tear the station apart. But every machine, no matter how advanced, followed basic principles of energy and matter. James connected his tablet to the main console, using the skills he'd learned repairing Naira's ship to understand the alien technology. The overload sequence was protected by multiple layers of encryption, but the physical controls. A warning klaxon blared as the reactor's containment field fluctuated. Through the armored window, James could see the quantum core pulsing with dangerous intensity. He had maybe 10 minutes before the reaction became irreversible. "Come on," he muttered, fingers flying over the controls. "Show me what makes you tick." His tablet beeped with an incoming transmission. For a moment, he feared the conspirators had found him, but the voice that came through was Naira's. "James, can you hear me?" She sounded out of breath, and he could hear fighting in the background. "I've reached the communication array, but they've locked down the main controls. I need more time." "We don't have more time," he replied, still working. "The reactor's going critical ahead of schedule. 10 minutes, maybe less." A pause, then, "Can you stop it?" "Maybe. But I'll have to do something incredibly stupid." He could almost hear her smile. "That seems to be your specialty." The transmission cut off as James made his decision. He couldn't stop the overload sequence, but maybe he could redirect it. The quantum core operated on principles similar to Naira's ship's drive. If he could modify the containment field. The door behind him burst open. James spun, weapon raised, to find Torrin standing there with several guards. "Step away from the controls," the ambassador ordered. "It's too late to stop what's coming." "You're right," James agreed, keeping his hands visible while subtly entering the final commands on his tablet. "It is too late, but not for the reason you think." Torrin's eyes narrowed. "What are you dash?" The reactor core flared brilliantly, causing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, warning messages flashed across every screen. "What did you do?" Torrin demanded. "Changed the quantum harmonics," James explained, allowing himself a small smile. "Instead of exploding outward, the core's energy is being channeled into the station's defensive systems." "You wanted to use those weapons?" "Well, now they're going to overload." Torrin's face twisted with rage. "You'll destroy the station's entire defense grid. Better than destroying the station itself." "Oh, and those weapons you were planning to use on the diplomatic ships? They're burning out right now." An explosion rocked the station as the first defense platform overloaded. Torrin and his guards stumbled, giving James the opening he needed. He dove for cover as energy beams crisscrossed the room. Through his tablet, he could track the cascade of overloading weapons. Each explosion weakened the station's structural integrity, but the damage was controlled, targeted. The diplomatic ships would be safe. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Torrin shouted over the chaos. "The galaxy needs this war. Progress comes through conflict." "No," James replied, thinking of everything he'd learned from Naira. "Progress comes through cooperation. Through building things, not destroying them. Through fixing what's broken." Another explosion rattled the station. Emergency bulkheads began closing as sections lost pressure. James used the confusion to make his way to a maintenance hatch, but Torrin was waiting for him. The ambassador's weapon hummed with deadly energy. "You're just a primitive mechanic. You can't possibly understand galactic politics." "Maybe not," James agreed. "But I understand machines. And I understand people who try to profit from others' suffering." Before Torrin could respond, the lights went out. A moment later, Naira's voice came through the station's communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention all vessels. This is Ambassador Naira of the Celestial Concordat. We have evidence of a conspiracy involving the Shadowborn Collective and corrupt officials. The attempt to destroy Europa Station has been thwarted, but we need immediate assistance." Torrin's moment of shock was all James needed. He tackled the ambassador, sending them both crashing to the floor. The weapon skittered away as they grappled in the emergency lighting. "It's over," James said, pinning Torrin down. "The evidence is already being transmitted to every diplomatic ship in range. Your war isn't going to happen." Through the viewport, he could see ships appearing, not collective vessels, but the combined fleet of multiple peaceful worlds, responding to Naira's call. The conspirators' carefully laid plans were unraveling in real time. As security forces finally arrived to arrest Torin and his conspirators, James made his way through the damaged station toward the communication array. He found Naira there, surrounded by freed diplomatic staff and disabled enemy agents. Their eyes met across the room, and despite the chaos and destruction around them, they shared a moment of triumph. They had prevented a war, exposed a conspiracy, and saved countless lives. But as alarms continued to sound and damage reports flooded in, they both knew their work wasn't finished. The station needed repairs, diplomatic relations needed to be rebuilt, and somewhere out there, other elements of the conspiracy were likely plotting their next move. For now, though, they had won. And as James looked at Naira, he realized that sometimes the greatest adventures began with a simple decision to help someone in need. The aftermath of the battle for Europa Station wasn't the end of the crisis, it was just the beginning. In the days that followed, James found himself working alongside repair crews from a dozen different worlds, racing to restore the station's critical systems before the diplomatic summit could proceed. The quantum harmonics are still unstable, he told Naira as they examined the damaged reactor core. We've contained the worst of it, but the whole system needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. She nodded, her luminescent eyes reflecting the core's pulsing light. The station's council has approved emergency measures. We'll have whatever resources we need. The arrest of Ambassador Torin and his conspirators had sent shockwaves through galactic society. The evidence Naira had gathered revealed corruption on a scale few had imagined possible. But not everyone was convinced, and some of the most powerful figures implicated in the conspiracy were still at large. Security teams found something interesting in Torin's quarters, Naira said as they walked through the station's recovering corridors. Transmission logs suggesting the Shadowborn Collective has a hidden facility in the Kuiper Belt. They're calling it Project Eclipse. James paused in his work. Let me guess, we're not just going to let that slide? The diplomatic summit begins in 48 hours. Before then, we need to ensure there are no more surprises. She touched his arm gently. I know I've asked too much of you already. I'm in, he said without hesitation. But we'll need a ship. Naira smiled. I think I can arrange that. Hours later, they were aboard a sleek diplomatic vessel, modified with James's improvements to its quantum drive. The ship moved silently through the outer solar system, its advanced stealth systems making it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. According to the intel, Naira explained, showing him the tactical display, Project Eclipse is more than just a weapons facility. It's where they've been developing their most dangerous technology, including plans for targeted solar manipulation. They want to weaponize stars, James realized, the implications hitting him hard. That's how they plan to ensure their war would last for generations. The facility came into view, a massive structure built into a large Kuiper Belt object, nearly invisible against the dark backdrop of space. As they approached, however, something felt wrong. These energy readings, James said, studying the displays. They're not consistent with a hidden base. They're too high, too unstable. Naira's expression hardened. They're destroying evidence. They must have known we were coming. The facility's outer sections began breaking apart, explosions rippling across its surface. But amid the destruction, their sensors detected something else, a massive energy buildup at the center of the complex. That's not just a self-destruct sequence, James said, his experience with quantum systems telling him exactly what they were seeing. They're trying to trigger a quantum cascade. The explosion would create a temporary artificial singularity, destroying not just evidence, but any ships that come to investigate, Naira finished. Including the diplomatic fleet that's surely on its way. James was already moving to the engine room. Not if I can help it. Get us closer. Closer? James, that's suicide. Trust me, he called back. I have an idea. As Naira piloted them through the debris field of the disintegrating facility, James worked frantically to modify their ship's quantum drive. The principles were similar to what he'd done on Europa Station, but this time he was attempting something far more dangerous. Whatever you're planning, Naira's voice came through the intercom, do it fast. We have multiple ships dropping out of quantum space, looks like both collective forces and diplomatic vessels. James connected the final circuits, his hands steadied despite the danger. When I give the word, I need you to fly straight into the center of that energy buildup. You want me to fly into an artificial singularity? Not exactly. He checked the modifications one last time. We're going to use their own weapon against them. The quantum cascade they're triggering? We can reverse it, turn it into a quantum dampening field. A pause, then, will it work? Probably not, he admitted. But it's better than watching half the solar system get swallowed by a black hole. He heard her laugh, a sound of equal parts fear and exhilaration. Well, when you put it that way. The ship dove toward the heart of the facility, dodging debris and weapons fire from arriving collective vessels. The energy buildup had reached critical levels, space itself beginning to distort around them. Now! James shouted, activating his modifications. Their quantum drive engaged, but instead of propelling them through space, it created a containment field. The cascade reaction at the facility's core met this field and rebounded, the opposing quantum forces creating a spectacular light show. For a moment, James feared he'd miscalculated. The ship's systems screamed warnings as reality itself seemed to flex around them. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The cascade reaction collapsed in on itself, leaving only a sphere of silent, dark space where the facility had been. Status report, Naira called from the bridge. James checked the readings, hardly daring to believe them. It worked. The reactions contained. No singularity, no system-wide destruction. He paused. Though I think we just invented a new form of quantum physics. I'm sure the scientists will love studying it, she replied. After they're done arguing about whose jurisdiction it falls under. The diplomatic fleet had arrived in force, surrounding the remaining collective ships. With the facility destroyed and their ultimate weapon neutralized, the conspirators had run out of options. As they flew back to Europa Station, James looked out at the stars, the same stars he'd grown up watching from his workshop on Earth, never imagining he'd be out among them. In just a few days, his life had changed completely, and he had helped change the course of galactic history. The summit will begin on schedule, Naira said, joining him at the viewport. The evidence we gathered, combined with what happened here, should be enough to ensure lasting peace. And the collective? Being dismantled as we speak. It will take time to root out all their influence, but it's a start. She took his hand, her silver skin shimmering in the starlight. We make a good team, you know. The diplomat and the mechanic. James smiled. Is that your way of offering me a job? More like a partnership. She turned to face him. Earth is joining the galactic community. We'll need people who understand both worlds, who can bridge the gap between different technologies, different cultures. People who can fix what's broken. Exactly. She leaned closer. Though I warn you, the hours are terrible, the danger is constant, and your workshop will probably get blown up at least once a month. James laughed, pulling her into an embrace. Sounds perfect. As they returned to the station, where representatives from 100 worlds were gathering to build a new future, James thought about the chain of events that had brought him here. One decision to help someone in need had led to an adventure beyond anything he could have imagined. But that was the thing about the universe, sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest choices. A mechanic deciding to work late. A diplomat trusting a stranger. Two people from different worlds finding strength in their differences. And as Earth joined the galactic community, James Carter, mechanic, hero, and now interstellar diplomat, knew his greatest adventures were still to come.